So what if I told you that the ultimate dream of buying a house might actually be one of the fastest ways to completely trap your wealth?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds totally counterintuitive, right?
Right. Or that the data definitively shows women are, like, statistically much better investors than
Yep.
men.
That's a huge one that always surprises people.
Or, and this is my personal favorite, that your daily iced coffee is absolutely not the reason you aren't a millionaire.
Exactly. It really is wild when you actually look at the math. The things we treat as, absolute financial gospel are often completely contradicted by the data.
We are definitely stepping into a very muddy landscape today. I mean,
Mm.
when you try to figure out how to get financially healthy, you are instantly bombarded with secret maps and crypto whispers and, like, loud guys on the internet yelling about their foolproof trading
Yeah,
algorithms.
and cue noise. And what is most frustrating is that the actual proven science of wealth building, like the rigorous academic data, is mostly ignored because it's quiet.
Yeah, it's boring.
It is boring. We like the thrill of a gamble, but our brains are simply not wired to process long-term abstract concepts like decades of compounding.
And that is exactly what we are clearing up today. So, welcome to today's deep dive. Our mission for you is to decode the actual academic science of wealth building.
Right, we are stripping away the hype and ignoring the speculation.
We're looking exclusively at what decades of data prove actually works, and we're pulling all of this from a massive, incredibly data-rich interview from The Diary of a CEO featuring financial researcher Ben Felix.
Yeah, his firm manages money for thousands of people based entirely on peer-reviewed academic research. Not market trends, just data.
So let's just jump right in. Before we even touch on investing or stock markets, we have to look at the actual engine of wealth, which is acquiring it and planning for it.
Because trying to invest when you aren't maximizing your earning power is, it's like trying to sail a boat with holes in the hull.
Totally. But the data shows that maximizing income isn't just about working harder. It's about building a skill stack.
Right. Your human capital is your most valuable asset, especially early on. And the market prices your human capital based on scarcity.
Scarcity, meaning how hard you are to replace.
Exactly. The way to exponentially increase your income isn't necessarily to become the absolute best in the world at one common thing. The math shows it's far more effective to combine rare complementary skills.
Okay, let's unpack this mechanism. It's not just mixing two random things. Think of it more like combining a standard smartphone with medical-grade sensors.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it.
Right, because a phone is common. A medical sensor is niche. But if you combine them, suddenly you have a portable diagnostic tool that healthcare systems will pay billions for.
Yeah, the value isn't just additive, it's exponential because you created a brand new, highly scarce category.
And the sources highlight a great real-world example of this with a standard writer.
Yes, the writer example. A competent everyday writer might make around, say, $50,000 a year because the market is just flooded with them.
Right, everyone can write.
But if that writer takes a brief detour, studies a highly specialized field, and becomes a biotech writer, suddenly they are getting paid $250,000.
And they didn't have to go to medical school for a decade. They just
Wow.
applied a common skill writing to a very lucrative, highly specialized market.
A market that desperately needs people who can translate complex data into readable text. The market dictates your value based on how hard you are to replace.
Wow. But even if you perfectly optimize your income, you run face first into another major hurdle.
The goal-setting problem.
Yes. If you don't actually define what you want your money to do, you will likely spend it climbing the wrong mountain. You just think you need to earn more because society says so.
Right. And the sources introduce this brilliant psychological forcing function for this. You sit down and write out your life goals.
Like whatever comes to mind.
Yeah, you want to buy a Ferrari, you want to retire at 50, whatever. Then you force yourself to double that list.
Double it.
Yeah, that forcing function is critical. Research shows that when you have to dig deeper and come up with 8 goals instead of your initial 4, those later goals are almost always the most meaningful.
The ones you really had to scrape your brain for.
Exactly. And to figure out if any of these goals will actually make you happy, psychologists apply the PERMA model.
Okay, I know this is an acronym from positive psychology,
Mhm.
but what is it actually evaluating?
PERMA stands for positive emotion, engagement, relationships, meaning, and accomplishment. It's basically considered the 5-factor model of human flourishing.
So checking all the boxes for a good life.
Basically, the premise is simple. If your long-term financial goals aren't directly feeding into those 5 buckets, you are literally wasting your money.
Okay, let's run a goal through that.
Yeah.
Say my initial goal was buying that Ferrari. How does a luxury car fit the PERMA model?
Well, you have to ruthlessly interrogate it. Does it bring engagement? Maybe. If you genuinely love mechanics, take it to the track every weekend and get into a flow state.
Okay.
Does it bring relationships? Sure, if you join an enthusiast club and build deep, lasting friendships there.
But what if I just wanted for the thrill of pulling out of the dealership and having my neighbors see it?
Then you are buying a fleeting, positive emotion. And that throws you right onto the hedonic treadmill.
Okay, we need to define that. What exactly is happening in our brains on this treadmill?
It's a psychological term for how human beings rapidly adapt to positive changes. You buy the Ferrari, and for a month, your dopamine spikes every time you open the garage.
You feel like $1,000,000.
Right. But eventually, your brain's baseline resets. It's no longer an extraordinary thrill. It's just the car you use to get to the grocery store.
Wow.
The thrill wears off. You return to your baseline level of happiness, but now you are out hundreds of thousands of dollars.
That makes a lot of sense. So once you actually know what brings you meaning, you inevitably face the single biggest financial decision that will dictate whether you achieve those goals or not.
Where and how you live.
The great renting versus owning debate. And this requires a massive shift in perspective. We really have to shatter this dogma that renting is throwing money away.
Oh, society pressures you so heavily to buy.
They really do. But the sources detail the massive unrecoverable costs of homeownership that people just completely ignore.
The problem is that people only compare their monthly rent to a monthly mortgage payment. If the mortgage is lower, they just assume buying is the smarter move.
Which is crazy.
It completely ignores the reality of owning. First, you have mortgage interest. That is money paid to the bank just for the privilege of borrowing.
Yeah.
It doesn't build equity. It is gone forever.
And you also have property taxes, which can be, 0.5% to 1% or more of the home's value every single year?
Exactly. And then there's the maintenance.
Yes. This specific data point blew my mind. Academic literature shows that people severely underestimate how much it costs just to keep a house standing.
It's not 1% of the property value.
No, it's often well over 2% every single year. The pool pump breaks, the roof leaks, the foundation cracks. That is all unrecoverable cash right out of your pocket.
And that cash drain introduces the absolute biggest hidden cost of all, which is opportunity cost.
Right.
When you put a 20% down payment on a house and you pour cash into endless maintenance, that is money physically trapped in the walls of your home. It is equity that could have been compounding in the stock market.
Because over the long term, real estate historically grows at around the rate of inflation. But the stock market vastly outpaces inflation.
Precisely.
To make this real and practical, the sources share a specific mathematical formula called the 5% rule to help you decide if you should rent or buy.
This rule is incredibly helpful.
You take the purchase price of the home you want, multiply it by 5% and divide by 12. So if you're looking at a $300,000 house, 5% of that is $15,000. Divide by 12 and you get $1,250.
Which means if you can rent a comparable home for less than $1,250 a month, renting is mathematically the better financial decision.
That 5% basically accounts for the property taxes, the structural maintenance, and that massive opportunity cost we just talked about.
Right, the cost of not having your cash growing in the stock market. And beyond the math, there is a massive career cost. Buying a house anchors you to one geography.
Oh, for sure. If you get a wildly lucrative job offer in a new city, but your equity is tied up in a condo in a market that just dipped.
You're trapped. Homeownership can literally kill your career mobility.
But wait, I have to push back here. What about the emotional security and what about the obvious success stories? Because at every family holiday, there's always an uncle bragging that they bought a house for $70 in the 90s that is now worth $1 million.
Right, everyone has that uncle.
Are we saying the American dream is a lie?
Well, we have to separate anecdotal survival bias from broader data. The rich relative bias is real, but real estate has highly localized periods of massive growth. It's not guaranteed to provide stock-like returns everywhere, forever.
And what about the happiness factor, the emotional security?
Sociological studies are fascinatingly clear on this. When you look at uncontrolled data, yes, homeowners report being happier. But that's simply because homeowners tend to be wealthier and live in much nicer, safer neighborhoods.
Ah, so the house is just a proxy for wealth.
Exactly. Because when researchers do controlled studies comparing renters living in nice neighborhoods to owners living in those exact same nice neighborhoods, The life satisfaction scores are identical.
Wow.
The deed to the house doesn't generate happiness. The environment and the community do.
That is a huge paradigm shift. Now, housing is rarely an isolated decision. You usually make it with someone else. Which brings us to the reality that your romantic life is fundamentally tied to your financial trajectory.
Without a doubt, academic research categorizes people into two main spending profiles. You have tightwads who experience literal, measurable emotional distress when spending money.
And then the spendthrifts.
Right, who feel very little pain when spending and fundamentally struggle to save.
And here is the painful irony of human attraction. The data shows that tightwads and spendthrifts are actually statistically more likely to marry each other than to marry someone with their own financial profile.
It's wild.
But why? Why would someone terrified of spending per spender marry someone who loves it?
It comes down to how we subconsciously seek balance. Initially, during the dating phase, it feels like a missing puzzle piece.
Okay, how so?
The tightwad, who is naturally anxious, is drawn to the spendthrift's carefree joy and ability to live in the moment. It feels liberating. Meanwhile, the spendthrift is subconsciously drawn to the tightwad's stability and discipline. It feels incredibly grounding.
But then you get married, and that cute dynamic turns into a decades-long nightmare.
Exactly. What felt balancing at first becomes a source of severe daily marital conflict. Researchers at Carnegie Mellon and the University of Michigan actually created a pain of paying quiz to measure this psychological friction.
Oh, I read about this. One scenario asks, you're at a restaurant with friends, the bill is being split evenly, but you ordered the cheapest item on the menu. How do you feel?
Right.
Ouch. I can feel the tension just hearing that.
Yeah, a tightwad feels physically pained. Their heart rate literally changes, and they will likely cause a massive fuss to pay less. A spendthrift feels completely fine, pays it, and figures it will all even out eventually.
How do you even test for this on a first date without sounding like a government tax auditor? Like, excuse me, before we order the appetizers, how physically pained will you be if we split this? It's not exactly romantic.
Definitely not.
And speaking of unromantic, the sources bring up prenups. Doesn't demanding a prenup kill the romance immediately by assuming the marriage will fail?
People assume prenups are planning for failure. But the blunt reality of the law is this. If you do not write your own prenup, the government already has a default one written for you via state divorce laws.
And it might dictate a split of your assets that you absolutely do not agree with.
Exactly. So you already have a prenup, you just don't know what's in it.
Right.
Because wealth building requires decades of uninterrupted compounding. If you have a spouse who is constantly undoing that compounding by overspending,
or a tightwad spouse hoarding to the point where your daily life has no positive emotion.
yes, it completely breaks the mathematical models of your financial plan. You must be aligned.
Okay, let's say you are aligned. You've stacked your skills, you ran the 5% rule and decided to rent, and you and your partner are totally synced up financially. You have capital. Now, how do you actually grow it?
This brings up our deepest psychological biases regarding risk and inflation.
Right, because the most instinctual thing people do with their savings is hoard it in cash. They think holding cash is safe.
But because of inflation, holding cash is actually a massive risk with a guaranteed negative return.
The math on this is terrifying. If you put $10,000 into your mattress today, and we assume an average historical inflation rate of 3% in 20 years, the purchasing power of that money essentially halves.
It's effectively worth about $5,336.
You literally lose half your wealth just by sitting still.
Which is why you must invest. But how you invest matters immensely, and this brings up a really fascinating data point about gender.
Oh, this is so interesting. Studies from platforms like Revolut, research from Wharton, and data from Fidelity all point to the exact same conclusion. Women outperform men in investing, sometimes by up to 4% a year.
4% a year, compounded over decades. That is a staggering difference in total wealth.
What is the mechanism driving that?
It comes down to the overconfidence bias. The data shows men are significantly more likely to think they can outsmart the market and pick winning stocks.
So they just trade more?
Exactly. As a result, they trade 45% more often than women. They are constantly tinkering, buying, selling, and incurring fees.
Which eats into returns.
Women, statistically, tend to be more risk-averse. They do not overtrade, and they let their investments sit. And in the stock market, the best long-term strategy is usually doing absolutely nothing. Buy low-cost, globally diversified index funds and lose the password to your account.
Just buy the whole haystack instead of looking for the needle. But let's look closer at what makes up that haystack. There's a highly controversial academic paper mentioned in the sources about life cycle investing.
Yes, conventional wisdom says when you're young, you buy stocks, and as you get older and retire, you shift to safer assets like bonds. But this paper analyzed 39 countries dating back to 1890.
And its findings shocked the financial world. The paper suggested that the absolute optimal portfolio for retirement consumption, meaning the best way to prevent running out of money, is holding 100% equities.
Specifically, about one-third domestic stocks and two-thirds international stocks. Zero bonds.
Zero bonds, even in retirement. We really need to explain the mechanics of this. How does holding 100% stocks protect you better than bonds?
Let's unpack the math of inflation. When you buy a bond, you are buying a fixed stream of income. If you buy a bond paying 3% and suddenly inflation spikes to 8%, your fixed 3% is mathematically guaranteeing that you lose purchasing power.
You are locked in.
Right, but equity stocks represent ownership in real, breathing companies. If inflation goes up, the cost of materials goes up, so those companies raise the prices of the goods they sell.
Their revenues increase with inflation.
Exactly. Equities act as a dynamic shield against inflation, whereas bonds are a sitting duck.
And why the heavy international split? Why two-thirds global?
Because if your home country experiences a severe, prolonged economic stagnation, think about Japan in the 1990s, your domestic stocks suffer. But by holding two-thirds of your portfolio internationally, you are buying the future cash flows of the entire global economy.
You detach your retirement from the fate of a single government or currency.
Right.
Now, to be clear to anyone listening, we are not telling you to go sell all your bonds today. The sources stress this paper is highly controversial and you need a psychological risk tolerance of steel to stomach the volatility of a 100% stock portfolio.
Oh, for sure. But it highlights the core philosophy. You are buying the entire global market, not picking individual winners.
Because picking individual winners is nearly impossible due to the efficient market hypothesis.
Right. This concept is mind-bending. The idea is that everything you think you know about a hot stock is already priced into it by the market.
Let's say you drive a Tesla. You love the tech, you think it's the future, so you want to buy Tesla stock thinking it's a great deal right now.
The efficient market theory states that millions of other investors, supercomputers, and multi-billion-dollar hedge funds already know it's a great car.
They already have the data.
Exactly. They've already factored the company's expected future growth into today's stock price. Unless you have illegal insider knowledge that no one else on the planet has, you aren't finding a deal. The information is already priced in.
So trying to outsmart the market is a fool's errand. But what if the market itself is doomed? We can't ignore the very real fear people have right now.
The doomsday panic.
Yeah. There are global conflicts, political chaos, and AI is threatening to wipe out entire industries. People are hoarding cash because it feels like the world is uniquely unstable.
It always feels uniquely unstable. The sources pull up this amazing historical magazine article describing a completely dark and incalculable future. It says the political cauldron is bubbling, empires are exhausted, industrial chaos is everywhere, and no man can see the end of the troubles.
That literally sounds like any major news website this morning.
Right, except that article was published on October 10th, 1847.
Wow, 1847.
The world has survived massive upheavals, world wars, and terrifying technological revolutions. And through all of it, the global market has continued to adapt, expand, and grow.
Take the fear around AI destroying jobs. History shows us something called the Jevons paradox.
The ATM example. When ATMs were first invented, human bank tellers were terrified their entire profession was dead.
I mean, it makes sense. A machine could dispense cash instantly, so why would banks need tellers?
But the exact opposite happened. Because ATMs made it significantly cheaper to operate a bank branch, banks suddenly had the capital to open way more branches to reach more customers.
Which means they needed more people.
Exactly. And because there were suddenly hundreds of new branches, they actually ended up hiring significantly more human bank tellers to handle the complex human-facing tasks like loans and customer service.
The technology didn't destroy the market, it made the core service cheaper, which expanded the market, which created more jobs. AI is highly likely to follow a similar path.
I completely agree.
Okay, so the global economy will survive, and we should invest our money in index funds so it can compound. But I want to circle back to the actual math of compounding for a second.
Okay, sure.
Because there is a flip side to this that sounds, frankly, miserable.
Hmm.
You have to talk about the iced coffee. The sources point out that if you put $10,000 in the stock market at a 7% return, in 40 years, it becomes $150,000.
That is the mathematical reality of compound interest, yes.
Okay, but does that mean my $10 morning iced coffee is actually costing me $150 in retirement? Because if every single dollar I spend today is theoretically stealing $15 from my future self,
You're just going to never spend a dime.
right, I'm just going to sit in an empty room staring at the wall. Doesn't thinking like that paralyze us from actually living?
This is exactly why we started this entire conversation with the PERMA model. Financial planning is not just a cold Excel spreadsheet where the only goal is the highest possible number at the end of your
It
life.
have to serve your life.
Yes, there is an opportunity cost to every single dollar you spend. That is an undeniable mathematical fact. But optimizing purely for an abstract future date while completely sacrificing your daily positive emotion and engagement is a catastrophic failure of financial planning.
So if that $10 coffee gets you through a tough morning and brings you a moment of genuine joy, it has high utility today.
Precisely. It's about intentionality. It's about not spending $12 on a coffee you chug mindlessly while stressed in traffic just out of habit.
It's about cutting mercilessly on things that do not fit your perma goals so you can spend guilt-free on the things that do.
Exactly.
Let's bring this all together. Building real generational wealth isn't about finding a secret crypto token or panic buying a house because societal pressure tells you to. It is highly methodical.
Very methodical.
First, you build a rare stack of complementary skills to exponentially increase your earning power. Second, you rigorously define what a good life looks like for you using psychology, not societal expectations.
And third, you run the actual math on housing, acknowledging the massive unrecoverable costs of owning, and prioritize your mobility and compounding capital.
Fourth, you ensure the person you marry is psychologically aligned with your financial trajectory, understanding the tension between spendthrifts and tightwads, and you protect both of you with a prenup.
And finally, you avoid the cash trap of inflation by investing consistently in low-cost, globally diversified index funds, recognizing your own biases, and completely ignoring the daily doomsday news cycle.
It is brilliantly boring. And that brings us to a final thought for you to mull over this week. We talked heavily about the efficient market hypothesis. This idea that the financial market instantly prices in all available information.
Meaning there are no easy, obvious deals sitting out there waiting for you. The market has already adjusted.
It's a highly powerful concept for navigating the stock market. But what about the market of our own lives?
Oh, that's interesting.
Think about the societal dogmas we hold on to tightly, like the absolute necessity of buying a house or staying in a miserable job just for the prestige, or ignoring red flags in a relationship because of sunk costs.
We often treat our lives exactly like we treat our portfolios.
Are we holding on to outdated assumptions that the market of human happiness is actually already proven inefficient?
Yeah, we hoard things we think we are supposed to value while completely ignoring the hidden fees, the daily stress, the lack of mobility, the quiet misery that are silently eating away at our emotional returns.
Exactly. So, take a look at your own life portfolio this week. Run your goals through the PERMA model. Ask yourself if you are making decisions based on actual data and your own true fulfillment, or if you were just following a noisy, outdated map drawn by someone else.
That's a great way to look at it.
Because true financial clarity isn't about relying on those secret maps and crypto whispers we talked about at the very beginning. It's about looking at the stark, undeniable evidence of what actually works and having the courage to build your life around it.